Hello, everyone. Good morning. Really nice to talk to you. Looking forward to this, and hopefully you find it as interesting as I do and we do at Blue Yonder. Helen's introduced me, so I don't need to do any of that stuff. So you know who I am. Quick one on Blue Yonder. We are an innovation-focused agency. We're based in Leeds, so I'm talking to you today from our facility in Leeds. And we are particularly focused on helping clients develop their innovations, but also spend a lot of time thinking about investing our own money in creating our own innovations and research tech. I have become something of a sustainability expert. I think the real thing that I care about is helping clients. So as over the last few years, as more and more clients have asked the same questions about sustainability, naturally myself and Blue Yonder have become more of an expert in it. It's not something that we set out to do. It just is the topic that everyone wants to understand. So we have learned a lot, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. This will not be the first presentation that you have seen on sustainability, I'm very sure. We are trying to add something a bit different in this session. The reason you can see the videos scrolling behind is that I find, especially at conferences, sustainability as a subject can become quite highbrow. It can become quite academic. You see a lot of brand-to-brand conversations, a lot of case studies of great stuff, and a lot of brilliant work done by smaller venture capital-backed brands that are starting up and doing fantastic stuff in the sustainability space. What we want to do is talk about the mass market. To be honest, we want to look at the quote-unquote average person in the UK and take a quite unapologetic view of what they're thinking about sustainability, with the idea of trying to help brands navigate it and product designers navigate it and try and come up with something which is actually going to make a difference. So that's sort of the theme of today's presentation. So hopefully you can see the slides moving on. Take that as a yes. First thing you have to do with sustainability is define it. So it's one of those big obese words. It's got a lot of different meanings. So first thing I did when I was writing this presentation is I went to my LinkedIn network and said to people, what's your definition of sustainability? Now, I did that because I was intending to start the presentation by holding us all to account for having vague and fluffy definitions of sustainability. In actual fact, I didn't get that. What I learned was that we all in marketing, R&D and insight, which is predominantly what my LinkedIn network is made up of, we all have very, very well rehearsed and elegant definitions of sustainability. And some of them are on this page, and people know what to say when they're talking about sustainability. The interesting thing is then when you contrast that with what your average person, and Donna is someone that I'm going to talk about a few times in this presentation, what she thinks about sustainability, and it's much, much vaguer. So it's like, generally speaking, it's something to do with recycling, bit about packaging, but there's nowhere near the sharpness of definitions in people's minds as there is for those of us who are working in industries like marketing, insight and R&D. And that's the first insight. The first thing to realize is that just like with everything else on brands, no one is thinking about this in as much detail as we are. So we need to put in a lot of work and effort to bridge that gap and to explain what we're doing. So last few years, Blue Yonder's done a study called the Sustainability Pulse. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we did that. We're all interested in sustainability and helping drive the planet forwards, but we did it because we were getting the same questions over and over again, and we thought there's a great opportunity to track this as it develops over time. So what I'm going to show you over the next sort of half an hour is taken from several different sources. So we've got a quant survey, NatRep UK, so that's where some of the data comes from. We've got some online ethnography and some in-home videos that we've done to sort of study how people are really looking at sustainability. We did a review of what everyone else is saying about it, and there's some interesting data later from Google that I'll share with you as part of this story. And then we've used our own ClickScape tool to help us get into the moments as well. So without trying to sell ClickScape to you, I do need to explain what ClickScape is. So ClickScape is a little button, and it's a binary button, quite an interesting bit of kit that we developed because we were getting asked to try and record emotional moments in market. So it's quite easy to get bio data and digital data from out there as people go about the world with their phones, but it's actually quite hard to get momentary emotional or observational data. So Clickscape is a button that you can code in two ways, so A or B, and you literally send people out into the world and say, every time you see or feel this thing, I want you to click it once for A and twice for B. So I'll give you an example of what we did with sustainability. We said, go about your daily lives, and every time you see a message or anything from a brand about sustainability, we want you to click once. Then click twice if it either meant something to you, or we did another mission that said, or it was relevant to you, or we did another one that said, or it just didn't feel credible to you. So that's how Clickscape works. And I'll show you some of the data as we go along. So several different sources, basically. So the first thing that you have to think about with sustainability, and I'm talking to a UK audience here, and sometimes we talk about Europe and the world, and it's a bit different. But in the UK, I think we can just be really honest. We've got other things on our minds than sustainability at the moment. There's all kinds of stuff going on, broken Britain, summer of discontent, and all of that. But the main thing that's going on is the economy, and everyone on here will know that costs are going up. So the first stat on this page did not surprise us, that 98% of people on our NatRep survey saw that costs had gone up. I think maybe what did surprise even us researchers is that 4 in 5 of the people on the survey estimate that their costs have gone up by at least 30%. So if you think about what 30% is in your disposable income, it's a huge chunk of money. And that is what is really on people's minds at the moment. And that is very relevant to sustainability because sustainability costs money. So we ask a nice question each year on this survey. One of the good ways to understand how British people are thinking about things is to talk about cups of tea. So we say to people, imagine your favorite tea brand, your favorite cup of tea that you drink every day. Imagine another version of that came out that was as tasty, as refreshing, gave you everything that you wanted in terms of esteem and brand love, and everything. It was exactly the same, but it was more sustainable in one way. Would you swap? So that could be packaging, it could be sourcing of ingredients, whatever, but would you swap? And the huge majority would make that shift. That's how simple the choice is. Like, yeah, all things being equal, of course I would. We then say, would you pay 20% more of it? And you see this huge drop off. And the interesting thing is that last year, that was only 1 in 4 would make the swap and pay more for it. This year, that's 1 in 5 people. Now that's a relatively small, but very significant drop. And if you translate that to population of the UK, that's several million people that are less willing to spend a little bit more for a sustainable product. So basically bad news, right, for sustainability. I'll just play this video and my friend Donna is going to talk to you about it.
I was looking at something costing £10 or the sustainable version was £13, but everything else was the same. I think especially in this day and age, I might just stick with the £10.
So it's really that simple. The key phrase in there is in this day and age. She's just less prepared to make that choice. Now, does that mean that we all give up and that's the end of the presentation and we stop trying to do things better for the world? No, but it does mean that it's just got much harder. So there's some simple Google data just to show search volumes over time. And you can see that the sustainability line is the blue line that's gradually going up over time. And it will continue to do so as more and more people get interested in it. Education levels go up around people. It will gradually go up. But what's happened in the last 6 months is that phrase cost of living is almost usurping it as something that's on people's minds. And that's kind of the first trade-off that we have to acknowledge at the moment. Like, you can have your big, bold ambitions on sustainability, but it is not what's on most people's minds. Onto the more positive stuff. This is the first Clickscape data. So really simple. We just ask people to click the button as they go about their lives every time they see a sustainability moment. And it's the same year on year. So absolutely exactly the same answer last year as this year. So despite all the pressure on costs, people are still seeing as many moments on sustainability, and it's no less important to them. So in this case, we said for the second click, tell us if that sustainability message was important to you. If anything, is slightly higher on average from the people that we asked to do that. So it's no less important, it's just as prevalent in people's lives, But because of cost increases in our daily lives, those trade-offs are getting much harder, and fundamentally brands and products are going to have to work much harder to cut through. So the rest of this presentation, I'm going to keep showing data from the study, and I'm going to try and break it down and give some practical advice on what we can do to overcome that challenge. The first one is to empathize. So the basic job of market research is to help companies empathize with their customers. And that's the first challenge in anything that you're trying to do. So let's talk about that. So how to empathize, you have to understand how people are feeling, right? So how are people feeling about sustainability at the moment? How important is it to you? I think the interesting thing when we ask that question is the way the answer is couched. So it's like, yeah, it is sort of important. It's not the most important thing. You would get words like probably, I guess, like it's there, but it's not the most important thing. What really matters to you? Quality, price, and convenience. That's what is really on people's minds first and foremost. And quality, you could swap that word for utility. In food, it could be taste. In transport, it could be efficiently arriving at my destination, but it's the thing that the product is supposed to do. So this sounds really, really simple. And Helen mentioned at the top that researchers need to be careful not to oversimplify. I agree with that. We also need to sometimes state the bleeding obvious, which is that this is not the most important, and that if you try and do sustainability without doing the three things that really matter to people, you are going to run into trouble. It comes across really clearly in the quantitative data. What matters to you when you're making purchases is the question we asked here. On the right hand side, you can see all the sustainability things. It's there, and actually 40-50% of people are endorsing those things, which is not a small number, but it's miles behind taste, utility, price, and availability. That's what really, really matters to people. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we can do sustainability, but you've got to have those three things absolutely nailed first. And I'm going to come on and talk about this towards the end of the presentation in much more detail. But what we feel the insight there is there's absolutely an edge that you can get to with sustainability to sell more product and to make commercial gains, because lots of products tick those three boxes. So assuming that you're one of them that ticks those three boxes, people really do want sustainability on top of that. And that's where the edge can come, and that's where you can get ahead. So getting that balance right is going to require innovation, and definitely things can go wrong. So this is an example, and apologies to anyone from Sainsbury's that's on the call, but sustainable cling film, plastic-based product. There's a definite desire for more sustainable cling film. The problem is that this particular cling film doesn't cling, so it doesn't work. And people have been pretty vocal about that online and expressing their discontent. Like whilst I'm talking, if you read some of these quotes, they're pretty entertaining. And that's fine. Like that happens. Like Blue Yonder is an R&D company. We know mistakes happen. It's just trying it out, but admitting if it's gone wrong. And the simple fact here is sustainability has been prioritized over and above the basic utility of the product. And that's not going to fly. People aren't going to be up for that. So as I said, people do want to help. They just need the other things first. So if you look at this, again, really, really simplified data, but when you buy a food or drink, which of the following things are important to you? A long list of quite different angles that people are coming at sustainability from. This is a little example, a very, very simple example of where market research needs to make sure we don't present just simple data, because it can be really misleading. So if you take that and you do a simple factor analysis, you group it up and you get a group of sustainable statements at the top. You then just look at what percent of people fall into that factor at all. And you can see it's pretty high, basically. So people are accessing sustainability in a lot of different ways, but in general, the vast majority are doing something. And that's really important. So the job has just got much more difficult because of the cost pressures. You absolutely cannot mess about with the fundamentals of what your product needs to deliver, which is about price, convenience, and utility. But people are there trying to make the difference. They do want easy ways to make the change. The other important thing if you're trying to empathize is you've got to use the right language. So this is quite interesting. So in all of the qualitative and ethnographic discussions that we've had with people, it's very interesting to note the way people talk about sustainability and what they do and don't say. So what you rarely will hear from your average person is the description of the utopia and the bright future where everything is green fields and there's windmills everywhere and it's just a beautiful place to be. That's not what people are saying. Like if you said to them, would you want that? They'd say, yeah, that would be lovely. But it's not how they talk about it spontaneously. What people talk about is avoiding the bad stuff. People are looking for easy ways to avoid and reduce the harm that they're having on the planet. So that's about plastic, air miles, carbon, just general waste. And that's the way to connect with people, is to offer them easy ways to reduce the harm that they're having on the world around them. Okay, so quite top line stuff, but they're the key things if we want to empathize and talk to people in the UK at the moment. Second section of this is be authentic, and this is quite a short section because it's quite simple. Under no circumstances should we ever, I was going to swear then, so I won't say that on for the MRS, but we shouldn't BS people. People could smell it. They know when someone's telling a porky. This is Clickscape data on the left-hand side. Click once every time you see a sustainability message, and click twice if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel credible or it doesn't fit with the brand. And actually 1 in 2 of sustainability moments that people are seeing are being dismissed because they're not credible. Really simple quote on the right-hand side. This is the level of cynicism that does exist around. So it's just so important. I'll just bring Donna back in at that point.
Even though like you have all the energy companies making a big thing about their eco tariffs and their green tariffs, when you actually looked into it, they weren't being particularly green. I don't think there was a way you could actually sign up to a tariff that guaranteed all your energy was from wind power or wave power or whatever.
That's a pretty typical piece of feedback that we'll get, is that I think probably when we first started looking at this maybe 5 years ago, it was very top level. People weren't going into the depths of clicking on the website and researching it for themselves. But nowadays that's much more common. And firstly, people will smell it if it's wrong to start with. They just have a sense for it. And secondly, they will start looking into it.
Even though, like,
and that's why the sort of most fundamental advice is, if you don't have a really strong sustainability offer, don't bother. Don't try and polish it up. This is going to become even more important because of the kind of apps that we're seeing launched. So this is an example from nutrition. I'm going to show you one later on, which is more about carbon usage. But it's really, really easy for people nowadays to just scan a product and immediately see all the information about that product in front of them at the point of purchase. So whichever way we try, people are going to spot it if we're not being 100% upfront with how sustainable our products are. So I think be authentic is fantastic advice for brands in general. When you're talking about sustainability, it's absolutely critical. All right, so for the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to go into a bit more detail about how do we navigate it, and where's the best place to put the messages and actually impact the decision-making process. Because this is the kind of number one question that we get from our clients. I think there's 2 general questions we get most often. The first one is, yeah, people say it, but they don't want it. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the second one is, yeah, I know it's important, but exactly where in the decision-making process does it come in? Where should I focus my marketing, my communication, and even my product and packaging design to make a difference? Okay, so again, let's start with a little bit of empathy. It's a very, very congested market, sustainability messaging. So this again is Clickscape data. And what we've done here is just showed the trend line of when people are seeing sustainability messages as they go about their daily lives. So this is just a 24-hour, no, not even, it's an 18, 12-hour period across a waking day. Orange line is food and drink, personal care is the blue line. And you can just see how it grows, and it basically roughly maps the advertising landscape. So it's a very, very congested area to be talking about. If you think about what that earlier number says, they're getting at least 9 messages a day, and that's the ones that they're noticing. During sustainability messaging a lot, it's really easy to waste your effort. If you think about the basic rule of advertising, which is that no one's paying that much attention, there are so many messages, so you've got to focus really hard on cut through first and foremost. Even more important with sustainability. Good news though, one of the things that has changed year on year is that people are seeing a more positive, believable, credible approach from brands. So this is again Clickscape data. So of the sustainability moments that you spot, how many of them really fit and feel right for the brand? So on average, in the course of a day, 2 more moments a day for everyone are feeling more, feeling like a better fit. So that's telling us that we're learning. All of the insight, all of the work, all of the great efforts from brands and companies to try and engage on this subject are paying off, and people are spotting it. So that's great. The challenge again, though, is bringing it back to price. So of all the moments that you see, again, this is Clickscape data, how many of them didn't really have an influence on your purchase? So 70% didn't have an influence on purchase. Now, almost no marketing and advertising messages have a direct influence on purchase, but the point stands particularly for sustainability. Yes, people will read it, but it's not having a direct influence. It tells you that a lot of sustainability messages are probably being wasted if the objective is to move product and to develop things. It's worth talking a little bit more about that. There's a lot more reasons to do sustainability than just to sell product. There's obviously it's ethically good to try and sell sustainable products and make that difference. But there's also the CSR objective. There's also, we know retailers are under huge amounts of pressure to be seen by government to do it. And therefore retailers are passing that on to products who need to be seen to be working in this area. So there's a lot of different areas. I always think the nice thing about marketing and branding and product design is that if you do good things with your product, it's a fantastic way to have a positive impact on the world around you, because you multiply that effect by millions and millions of purchases. So a lot of different reasons to be doing it. From purely a commercial angle, a lot of messaging and a lot of work is going to be wasted because it's just not directly relevant to purchase. There is hope though. People do want to believe you. So this is quite interesting, because I mentioned earlier that there's a level of cynicism. That's when people can smell a rat, when there's an authenticity problem. In general, sustainability is difficult. I talked about it at the beginning. It's a confusing, vague area to people. They are looking to the products that they buy to educate them and to tell them this is using less packaging, this is more responsibly sourced. They are generally looking to work for them as much as possible. So here's a nice quote to talk about that. Hold on. Right.
Almost doing that comparison for you, well, it will last you 10 years more is better. So potentially they could show that comparison rather, this is the price, it's more expensive.
So they're looking to brands and they want help with it and they want to get their information, but they don't want to do any effort. So again, as I said at the beginning, unapologetically consumer focused view, we're going to have to do it for them. We need to be showing them the trade-offs. Very similar analysis to what I showed you before. The specific behaviors and the way that people are engaging with sustainability are quite diffuse. Like they do vary a lot. Here are the various different things that people are doing. Again, if you do the factor analysis and you just bucket it up and look at who's doing something sustainable already, like actively involved in it, the vast majority are. So 82% are doing something. So they want to get involved. They want brands to talk to them, and they are already actively involved themselves. So then the question is more about at what point should we focus? Where should we try and influence people? And that's where it's good to bring in some thinking from Google. So for those of you who've never seen this, if you Google consumer insights on Google, you'll get to some fantastic pieces that company has done. Obviously, they're sitting on just a world of digital behavioral data. So this is the decision-making process as refreshed by Google in the last 12 months. If you Google messy middle, you'll get to the paper. And it's pretty simple and intuitive, but basically what it's saying is that rather than a purely linear process, people go through quite a messy decision-making process, and it varies hugely by, yes, sector and product, but also by individual. Everyone is totally different in the way that they make decisions. So there is no one model. But in general, what you can see is that people go through, and firstly, they get triggered into into the decision. And the trigger for a decision is very, very unlikely to be sustainability. They then go on an exploration loop where they're basically building their consideration set, and they're looking for brands and products that meet their three core needs, which is utility, convenience, and price. And they build that consideration set. They then go into the evaluation loop where they try and bring that set down and bring it into just a few brands and products that they can choose from. Now, the thing that Google are talking about is people very clearly go in and out of those loops, and they can pretty much do that indefinitely. So from exploration into evaluation, back to exploration, eventually they'll get spat out at a purchase. So this is a really useful model for us because it can help us think about, okay, so where should sustainability play? So the first thing is that, as I said, very unlikely to be the trigger in the first place. There are a few niche brands that are just sustainable and that's it, but unlikely. The exploration phase, also unlikely, because that's not what people are interested in. And that's quite important, because if the temptation is to build big above the line campaigns, there's a real risk of wasting money there. Where we think sustainability really comes in is at the sharp end. So when you get into the evaluation phase and at the purchase phase, and you get into the packaging and that sort of thing, that's where sustainability can play. And I'll talk about that a bit more. I think the first thing is just that point about being careful not to waste above the line money at the top end. Because when you talk to people and sort of observe where their sustainability knowledge comes from, it's just sort of seeping into them. And that they're just not looking for it at that point. What they're looking for is product and brand information. So although there might be CSR reasons and other reasons to do big above the line campaigns, if we're focusing purely on sustainability messaging at that point, it's probably not going to be driving a lot of sales. Where they do want it though is in the packaging. So people, if you go back to what I said before, that people want easy ways to reduce their impact on the world around them. They want easy ways to make better choices. Firstly, they need to believe that your product is good for them, and that's what they're doing at their exploration stage. But having established that and you're on the set, then it's like easy, simple messaging. And it can be point of sale, or it could be on pack, or it could be at the point of click or wherever, but easy, simple messaging that just says, you know, this one, it's just better for the world. And that's the edge where we think sustainability can really have a role. I'll just go through a couple of examples of how that actually pans out in the real world. Packaging is an art form. Getting everything that you need to get on a tiny piece of real estate in the right way is kind of a beautiful craft. It takes a lot of thought. And this is a really good example from Nestle that's out there in the shelves. Next time you're in a petrol station, you'll see this. And it's actually a great example because the Smarties buttons sit in a row with probably 6 or 10 other chocolate packaged products. What they've done first is they've landed the brand benefit. So there's a lot of brand loyalty for Smarties. Let's get that front and center. They've also shown a picture of Yum, tasty chocolate treat. I'm up for that. So you're on board. Then they've moved into the other areas. So that's the key, is to establish the big things first and then get the edge from the sustainability. So I'm recyclable. There's the claim. The reason to believe is I'm paper. And then it is made of paper. So that's demonstrated as you pick the thing up. And that's where the edge can lie. It's like, oh, fancy a chocolate treat. I like Smarties. I also like Maltesers and other products. This one's sustainable. I'll lean that way. And it's as simple as that. That really split-second decision. That's where we think sustainability messaging should be focused and where it can have the biggest impact. Really interesting. And I don't have time to talk loads about it, but if you go onto Semiotics, when you pick up the paper packaging, the different cues it sends out are quite powerful. So I don't know if any of you have done it, but paper cues health, organic, general goodness versus plastic. It just happens in your brain, system one, immediately. And obviously that is a huge amount of benefit for that as well. It's this fascinating area, and that's where sustainability can really play. There's a lot of things that you also need to be aware of though when playing around with packaging. I'm sure this wasn't malicious, but this is an example of where people can become confused quite easily. So, and it's just being aware of the semiotics that are out there already in the culture. So in the UK culture, a rotating arrow that you can see in the circle, it's a bit grainy, that means recycling to people. This product is not recycling. Feminine hygiene in general, not very recyclable, and this product's no different. So there's nothing against the product there. But the way that we're talking about CO2 reduction by using the arrows is actually confusing people. And at best, it gets ignored because when people are confused, they ignore stuff. It's the way the mind works. But also, at worst, it can irritate people because firstly, people don't like being irritated, don't like being confused, so they get irritated. But secondly, it can accidentally come across as being a bit insincere. So it's again, just being aware of the cues. I really like this recent example from Waitrose, again about semiotics. So there'll be people on this call that know a lot more about this than me, but the simple version is colored plastics are bad for recycling. What you really want is transparent plastics because then they can all be melted down into little balls and turned into other things really easily. Color confuses things because obviously you don't always want that color in your newly recycled plastic. So what Waitrose did, realized that what we could do to help is we'll make all our bottle tops transparent. Really great move. But the problem is we all choose our milk types almost exclusively by looking at the top. Like we know whether we're blue, green or red, and we choose it and we grab it. So that's a very, very powerful semiotic cue. And if you get rid of that, you are going to have some challenges. Does that mean you shouldn't do it and you shouldn't make the positive move towards sustainability? Absolutely not. But you've got to be aware of that and then use the rest of the real estate on the pack to put across the messages that you need to put. It also means that you need a bit of patience because that will inevitably lead to some confusion. It might lead to a drop in sales for the short term. But if you educate and you stick with it, there's every chance that people will come around and figure out the new way, and those shortcuts will be reformed in a different way. Going back to, this is the app that I mentioned before, so Geeky. Both of these apps, interestingly, are far more used in Europe than they are in the UK. I don't know what that tells you about the UK, but it's just being aware that the apps are coming where it will be really easy to scan a product and immediately see what the carbon benefits are. So that's something that will be led by the younger generation and will come through over the next 10 years or so. And it's where the edge is, it's where the decisions, the split decisions are going to be made, is point of sale. So having a strategy for that is really important. To sum up that part, and I've got two more thoughts for you before I finish, but just to sum up, how do we navigate an increasingly challenging sustainable minefield? First thing we do is we empathize. We understand how people are feeling about it. Firstly, we understand that it is not their number one concern at the moment, even if we'd like it to be. And then we talk to them in their language, which by the way is also our language, if we're honest, but we talk to them in the way that people understand it. We avoid inauthenticity at all costs. And then we're smart about where we put our messaging. Now, in presentations like this, I have to speak generally. The smart aspect, it varies very, very much. I've had this conversation with airlines, with FMCG, with birthday card manufacturers, with financial institutions. It varies a lot. But I think the key takeaway is understand the decision-making process in detail, and then you can figure out where to put the messaging and where to put your efforts to drive the product forward. Two more thoughts for you before I finish. I mentioned the sustainability paradox earlier, which is that very, very common, especially from marketing directors. Yeah, people say they want it, but they don't buy it. And that is often a reason given for not really pushing ahead with investment in sustainable products. We did a really, really simple segmentation. It's very, very intuitive, but without going into it in a lot of detail, you've got basically three types of people when you're talking about sustainability in the UK. And there is a group, about 31% of people, that will tell you they don't care about sustainability. So this is the opposite of people saying that they want it and not doing anything. This is people saying that they don't want it. They only care about taste, price, and convenience. Well, actually, if we go back to the list of behaviours, 62% of the practicals are already doing something sustainable. So, next time you hear someone tell you that they want it, but they won't do it, you can also say, actually, there's a lot of people that don't want it, but are already doing it anyway. And then the final thought, and this is particularly important for us for the market researchers in the room, we just have to keep listening and stay aware of the fact that this is changing constantly. So, I mean, that's pretty much the main reason that Blue Yonder invest in doing this thing every year, because we know that this time next year there's going to be a whole load of stuff that's come up that we don't have this year. This is an interesting example. So I personally have done a fair bit of work in the last few years on meat-free protein, and it's just looking at how that debate has developed. So it starts off quite simple. So meat-free protein is good because eating less meat is good and it's healthy, and that's nice. There's then another level of it, which is that methane is bad from animals, and that goes into the greenhouse, and that's a slightly more complex thing, but we need to think about that as well. There's then the fact that it's using less land is important. Using less land comes into it and complicates things, because actually, if we're looking at plant-based food uses an awful lot of land and has been responsible for quite a lot of rainforest clearing. So once people become aware of that, suddenly the trade-off between maybe an organic meat sourced relatively local with a low carbon footprint might actually not be as bad as a plant-based product. And then there's the whole monoculture thing. Like most plant-based foods coming from corn and from soya, that's monoculture, so that's not great either. So really tough. The reason I just make that point is that it changes, and I've seen that evolve over the last few years, and every category will have that. The issue that's on people's minds today is going to change. So we've got to keep listening, and we've got to keep paying attention to the detail. And the quote at the bottom from Ed there is just making that point. From the consumer point of view, every time you think you've nailed it and you're like, yeah, okay, I'm consuming in a sustainable way, something else comes up and blows you out of the water. So it's really, really tough for us as like researchers and brands, but it's doubly hard for people going about their daily lives. So actually, it's a really, really important job for market research there, is to stay on top of it and to just be that connection point between the brands and the companies and the retailers making the big calls and the people that are actually trying their very best to stay up with it.